The payphone had been disconnected for years. No active line, no power, no signal. I know that because I dug up the cable myself. 40 feet from the booth, it ended in the dirt. Capped, dead, wired to nothing. But 14 people vanished from our county in 18 months. And after each one disappeared, their family received a call from that same dead payphone. Their voices were calm. They were not asking for help. They were asking someone else to come out to the booth. There is a payphone 9 miles out of town on the county road, bolted to a booth outside a filling station that has been closed for years, and that payphone has been disconnected from the telephone network for longer than my sister has been alive. No line runs to it. I have dug up the cable with my own hands and held the cut, capped end in my fist, and I can tell you it goes into the ground, and 40 feet from the booth simply stops, wired to nothing, connected to no switch, no network, no exchange anywhere on this earth. By every record my own company holds, that phone cannot ring, cannot dial, cannot carry a single word. And in the space of 18 months, 14 people vanished from this county, and every one of them, after they were already gone, called their families from that dead phone in the middle of the night in their own voices, and not one of them was calling for help. My sister was the 14th, and 4 nights after she disappeared, my own phone rang at 3 in the morning, and the screen showed that booth's number, and it was Dely, my sister, calm and warm and pleased to hear me. And she did not tell me where she was, and she did not ask me to find her. And the last thing she said before the line went dead was that it was bigger than I'd think, down there, that there were so many of them, that she could see the whole road from where she was, and that if I drove out to the booth, she would show me. I need to tell all of it, in order, because I am the only one who understands what that phone actually is, and because I am the only one who managed to stop it, and I did not stop it with prayers or with courage or by refusing to answer. I stopped it with a welding rig and 40 feet of chain and a supply list, because the thing at the end of the county road was never a ghost. It was a machine standing over a wound in the ground, and I fix machines for a living, and that turned out to be the only thing in the world that mattered. My name does not matter to this account. What matters is what I do. I am a field technician for a regional telecommunications company, which means I am the man they send out alone in a marked van when a line goes dead or a node stops reporting or a whole neighborhood loses service in a storm. I have spent my working life learning how a call actually travels physically as a real thing. Electrons push down copper or light pulse down glass through junction boxes and switches and the deep buried arteries of a system most people never think about until it fails. I understand the plumbing of it. I mention this not because the job is the point, but because the job is the reason I could do what I eventually did, and because the way I think, which is to trace every fault back to a physical cause, is the only reason I ever saw the truth. A person who believes in ghosts would have gone out to that booth to speak to the dead. I went out to it to find the fault. That difference saved my life, and it is the difference I most want to pass on to you. The phone stands or stood about 9 miles out of town on the old county road at a filling station that closed when the highway bypass opened and took all its traffic. The pumps are gone, pulled out and sold, leaving stubs of pipe in the concrete. The windows of the little shop are soaped white, and the canopy over the empty pump island is going to rust in long orange streaks. It is the kind of place your eye slides off of at 50 miles an hour, a dead spot on a road that itself is mostly forgotten now that the bypass carries everyone. And at the edge of the lot, near where the road runs by, there was one of the old telephone booths, aluminum frame and glass panels, and inside it a scarred steel payphone, the heavy institutional kind they stopped installing decades ago. That phone had been disconnected, on paper, for a very long time, and that is where 14 people in this county went, before they were gone, and where all 14 of them called from after. I want to build this the way I built my own understanding of it piece by piece, because if I simply told you the conclusion, you would not believe it, And I would not blame you, because I did not believe it either until the evidence left me nowhere else to stand. The first thing to understand is that this was never a private thing, never a secret whispered to one lonely person in the dark. Half this county knew something was wrong with that phone before I ever set foot in the booth. The sheriff's office knew. The deputies had noticed the pattern and had, I later learned, deliberately stopped writing it down, because putting it in the reports made them sound as though they had lost their grip. The pattern was this. Over about 18 months, people began to disappear from this county at a rate that was not normal for a place this size, and the cases did not look like the ordinary ways people go missing. These were not runaways or people fleeing debts or bad marriages. They were settled people, people with jobs and children and reasons to stay. And they vanished cleanly, completely, leaving their cars in their driveways with the keys in the dish by the door, and their phones charging on their nightstands and their coffee cups in the sink. People do not leave that way on purpose. People who mean to disappear take their car and their phone and their money. These people took nothing. They were simply one day, not anywhere, and every single one of them, in the days or weeks before they vanished, was seen at that booth. Not always using the phone. That is the detail that first turned my stomach when I understood it. Sometimes they were seen with the receiver to their ear, standing in the booth at some strange hour on a road where no one has any business standing. But often they were just there, standing in the booth or beside it, on the empty lot, at dawn or at dusk or at 3 a.m, with no car parked nearby, as though they had walked the 9 miles out from town, which some of them, it was later established, actually had. A long-haul trucker filed a report about a woman standing in that booth at 4 a.m. in a hard rain, no umbrella, no car, just standing in the lit booth on the black, wet road, and he'd slowed and rolled his window down and called out to her, and she hadn't turned, and he'd been unsettled enough to phone it in at the next stop. A teenage boy was seen at that booth by 3 different drivers over the course of a single week, at dusk each time, standing at the glass. And then, within a few days of being seen out there, each of them was gone. The deputies noticed. Of course they noticed. When you have 14 missing person cases and the one thread they all share is a disconnected payphone 9 miles out of town, you notice. And then you don't know what to do with it, because what is there to do with it? And so you stop writing it in the reports, and you send the search teams out to walk the fields and drag the retention ponds, and you find nothing, because the people are not in the fields or the ponds. My sister was the 14th, though none of us knew there was a count until I went and assembled it myself. I will call her Dely. She was 34 years old, a nurse at the county hospital, a mother to a boy who is 7 now and is being raised by our parents in a house that has learned to be very quiet. Dely was the steadiest person I have ever known. She was not a wanderer, not impulsive, not the kind of woman who walks off into the night. She counted medications for a living. She was careful with everything, careful with her boy, careful with money, careful with people. If you had made me a list of every person on this earth and asked me to rank them by the likelihood that they would one day simply vanish off the face of it, my sister would have been at the very bottom. And that is exactly why what she told me in our last real conversation frightens me so much now, in hindsight, though I let it pass at the time. She called me one evening, an ordinary call, the kind of call we had 2 or 3 times a week, and in the middle of complaining about a long shift she said something that snagged in me and that I have replayed 10,000 times since. She said she kept driving out past the old filling station on her way home from the hospital. And I said, "That's not on your way home, that's the opposite direction." And she said, "I know, that's the thing, I keep doing it, and I don't know why." She said she would finish a shift and get in her car, meaning to drive home to her boy, and she would come to herself 20 minutes later out on the county road, going past the closed station, with no memory of deciding to go that way. And once, she said, and she laughed when she said it, an uneasy little laugh once she had actually pulled in and gotten out, and stood in the booth for a minute, and then snapped out of it and gotten back in the car, feeling foolish, and driven home. "Isn't that strange?" she said. And I said, "Yes, that's strange. Don't do that. Stay away from out there." And she said she would. And we talked about her boy and about our parents and about nothing. And we hung up. And that was the last real conversation I ever had with my sister. Me telling her to stay away from the thing that was already, even then, reeling her in 20 minutes at a time, and both of us treating it as a funny little curiosity, a quirk, a story to tell. 8 days later, her car was in her driveway with the keys in the dish, and her phone charging on the nightstand, and her boy's breakfast bowl in the sink from that morning, and Dely was gone. I did not fall apart. I am not made to fall apart. I have sat in a lot of dark, wet junction boxes at 4 in the morning, with the rain coming down, and a whole town's phone service riding on my finding one corroded splice. And what that work does to a man over 20 years is it makes him unable to sit still in the presence of a fault. There is a fault. Find it. Trace it back. That is the only prayer I know. So while my parents grieved and the sheriff's office ran its useless searches, I did the only thing I know how to do, which is I went looking for the physical cause, because I did not then believe, and had never believed, in anything that did not have a physical cause. And every version of the story, every account from every family, every deputy's half-swallowed remark pointed at one physical object at the center of it all, so I went to that object. I went to the phone. I want to describe standing in that booth the first time, in broad daylight, because it matters that it was daylight, and that I was calm, and that nothing dramatic happened, because that is how these things actually work. They do not announce themselves with cold winds and slamming doors. They wait, patient and physical, and they let you lean on them. It was a hot afternoon in the back half of summer. The booth stood at the edge of the cracked lot, and the heat came off the aluminum in waves. Inside, the air was close, and it smelled first of hot metal and dust, the ordinary smell of any sun-baked booth. But under that, when I stood a moment longer, there was another smell, and it was wrong, and it was the first solid piece of evidence I ever had that this was not nothing. It was cold. In a booth radiating heat, there was a thread of cold air, and it carried a mineral smell, a whetstone smell, the smell that comes up out of a deep hole in the ground, out of a well or a cave, the smell of air that has been underground a long time and has never seen the sun. It was coming up from around the base of the phone, from the seam where the cable ran down into the concrete. I noticed it, and I filed it, and I did not yet know what it meant. The receiver hung on its steel hook. I picked it up. I want to be clear that I did this out of pure reflex, the technician's habit, the thing my hand does 1,000 times a year. Pick up the handset, listen for tone. And there was no tone, of course, because the phone is disconnected. I would confirm that a dozen ways over the coming weeks. But there was not silence either. What was in that receiver was a sound, and I have spent a great deal of my life listening to what comes down a phone line, the hiss and the crackle and the hum of the physical network. And this was none of those. It was the sound of a large space. It was the sound you hear when you cup a big shell to your ear, that soft roar, but deeper and truer, the sound of a very large empty volume with air moving slowly through it, and under that roar, far, far down, at the very edge of what I could be sure I was hearing and not inventing out of my own fear, there was another sound, and it was the sound of people. Not voices, not words. The murmur. The blurred, low sound a crowd makes when you are too far from it to make out anyone in particular. The sound of a great many people gathered in another room, in another building, present, breathing, waiting, too distant to be understood. It came up out of the dead receiver in a wave, and I put the handset back on the hook faster than I have ever put anything down. And I stood there in the heat, with my own heart going, and I told myself it was the wind moving in the cut cable underground, a resonance in the aluminum box, an acoustic trick. I told myself that. I am telling you now that I did not for 1 second believe it, and that I got in my van and I drove back to town, and I did not sleep that night. And the next day I came back with my equipment, because a fault is a fault, and I could not leave it alone. I traced the cable first, because that was the thing I could actually test, and because I needed to prove to myself that there was some real wire carrying some real signal that could be explained. I found the run where it came out of the base of the booth and went into the concrete of the old lot, and I followed it out, digging where I had to, for 40 feet, until I reached the end of it. And the end of it was a clean cut, capped the way a line is capped when a service is permanently retired, sealed off, dead, connected to nothing. There was no splice carrying it onward. There was no illicit tap into a live line. There was no buried transmitter, no clever hoax, no hidden battery. I checked for all of it. I am thorough. It is the one virtue my trade has beaten into me. The cable came out of the phone and went 40 feet and ended in the dirt, capped, wired to no network anywhere. I put a meter on the phone itself, and it read, dead. No current, no stored charge, no power of any kind. It was, by every physical measure I have, and I have a great many, as dead as a phone can be. And I had heard a crowd murmuring in its receiver, and 14 people had called their families from it. So I stopped testing the phone, which had told me everything it could, and I went and found the families. This is the part where the private thing became, for me, undeniably real, because it was not one voice telling me one story that I could dismiss as grief or madness. It was 13 families, 13 households, and I went to all of them, one by one, over several weeks. An ordinary man in work clothes knocking on doors and saying I was sorry to intrude and that my own sister had been the 14th, and would they talk to me? And most of them did, because grief wants company, and because they had all been carrying the same impossible thing alone and were desperate, every one of them, to find out they were not the only ones. And what they told me, 13 times over, with only the small variations of 13 different mouths, was the same account, and it is the account that let me finally understand what the phone actually does. They all got a call. After the person was already gone, days later, weeks in some cases, always at night, always in the small hours. The phone would ring, the family's ordinary phone, and the caller ID would show a number that, when I later checked it against my company's records, traced to that disconnected booth on the county road. And on the line was the missing person. Their own voice. Not a recording, not an imitation. The families were certain of this, absolutely certain, in the way you are certain of the voice of someone you have loved your whole life. The husband knew his wife. The mother knew her son. Dely's voice was Dely's voice, down to the small catch she'd had in it since we were children, the little hitch when she said my name. And the voices were calm. That was the thing that had undone every one of these families, the thing they could not get past, the thing that had kept some of them from ever telling the police at all because they knew how it would sound. The voices were not frightened. They were not pleading. They did not beg to be found. A woman whose daughter had been gone 3 weeks told me she had screamed into the phone, "Where are you? Tell me where you are." And her daughter had simply talked calmly over the screaming, the way you talk over static on a bad line, not answering, not able or not willing to hear the question, saying instead the same handful of things all of them said. Because they did all say the same things, and once I laid the 13 accounts side by side, the sameness was its own kind of proof. The voices said they were fine. The voices said it wasn't far. The voices said, and here more than half the families used nearly identical words, unprompted, not having spoken to one another, that they could see the family, that they were closer than the family thought, that they'd be home soon. It could see them. It was not far. It would be home soon. And then, in every case, the line went dead, and when the family called the number back, frantic over and over, it rang and rang in the empty booth on the empty road, with no one and nothing to answer, because the phone is disconnected and cannot receive a call, and yet, minutes before, it had made one. Dely called me on the 4th night after she vanished. I had known, going into all those other families, that this was probably coming for me too, and I had told myself I was ready for it. And I was not ready for it. There is no being ready for it. My phone rang at 3 in the morning and lit up the dark bedroom, and the screen showed the booth's number, which by then I had memorized the way you memorize a thing you cannot stop looking at. And I answered before the second ring, and I said her name and She said, "Mine? With the catch in it?" And it was her. It was my sister. Every cell in me knew it was my sister. And she was calm, and she was warm, and she was so pleased to hear my voice. She said, "I've been wanting to talk to you," and I was already crying. And I said, "Dely, where are you? Tell me where you are. Well, come, just tell me." And she talked gently over all of it, over the question, over the crying, the way the daughter had talked over her mother's screaming, and she said she was fine. She said it wasn't far. And then she said the thing that turned everything cold and clear in me all at once, the thing that stopped my grief in its tracks and turned it into something I could use because it told me finally what I was dealing with. She said in her own warm voice, in the middle of the night, "It's bigger than you'd think down here. There's so many of us. We can see the whole road from here. I can see the booth from where I am. Come out to the booth, and I'll show you." Come out to the booth. Not find me. Not save me. Not I'm lost. I'm trapped. Help me. She knew exactly where she was. She was not calling to be rescued. She was calling to bring me there, the way the daughters call, and the sons call, and all 13 of the others had been calls to bring the next one there. And the horror of it, the specific horror that broke something loose in my understanding, was that there was no malice in her voice at all. She wanted me to come the way you want to show someone a beautiful thing. She wanted to show me. Come out to the booth, and I'll show you. I did not go out to the booth that night. I want to say I was strong, but it was not strength. It was that the cold clarity had arrived along with the invitation. And in that clarity, I finally started to think about the phone, the way I think about everything, which is as a machine, and to ask the only question I know how to ask, which is not what does this mean, but what does this do? Not why. What? What, physically, does this device do to the world? And when I made myself ask it that way, when I set aside the ghost and the grief and looked only at the evidence I had gathered, the answer was there. And it had been there the whole time in the smell and the sound and the geography. And I want to give it to you exactly, because it is the whole of how this ends, and because it is, in its own terrible way, simple. Start with the cable. The cable is cut and capped 40 feet out and connects to no network on the surface of the earth. So when the phone carries a voice, that voice is not coming from the surface. It is not traveling in from town along a wire. There is no wire. The signal, if you can even call it that, is not moving horizontally across the county to reach the booth. So where is it coming from? Add the smell. Cold air, mineral, whetstone, deep earth air, the air of a well or a cave, coming up out of the seam where the cable goes down into the ground. Add the sound in the receiver, not the hiss of a network, the roar of a very large empty volume, and under it, far down, the murmur of a great many people gathered together, distant, waiting. Add the geography, the thing every family and every deputy had circled without landing on. The people were drawn out to that one fixed point on the county road. They drifted there without knowing why, daily 20 minutes at a time. They stood in that one booth, and from that one booth, after they were gone, their voices came back up. The phone was not wired to a switch. The phone was wired, if that word even applies, downward. It was a fixture standing over a place below, a large cold space, a great volume in the ground, and that space was full of the people it had taken, and the calls were not signals traveling through copper at all. The calls were that space close to the surface at that one point, thin at that one point, the way the ground can go thin and soft over a cavern or an old mine or a sinkhole waiting to open. The booth was not a phone booth. It was a marker standing over a soft spot in the world, and the receiver was not a receiver. It was a handle. It was the thing you pick up and lean on when you are standing at the thin place, and leaning on the thin place, holding the handle, standing in the booth at odd hours, is how you go through. That is what the going out beforehand was. It was not a summons in the sense of a voice in your head calling your name. It was subsidence. It was slope. The thin place had a pull to it, a physical drift, the way a low spot in a floor gathers everything that rolls, the way water finds the soft ground and works it softer, and the people who drifted out there were already, without knowing it, sliding. And each time they stood in the booth and picked up the handle, they slid a little further down the slope, until one ordinary day They slid the rest of the way, down into the large, cold space beneath the county road, with all the others. And from down there, the fixture at the thin place, the phone, carried their voices back up that last little distance to the surface, one call per household, calm, warm, wanting to show you, and the call had one function and one function only, which was to draw the next living person out to the thin place so that they too would begin to slide. There was no malice in it. I have thought about this a great deal, and I have come to believe there was no more malice in that phone than there is in a sinkhole. It did not hate anyone. It did not choose anyone out of cruelty. It was a physical feature of the ground, a soft place, a wound that happened to intersect a phone booth on a forgotten road, and it did what such things do, which is grow, slowly, by taking whatever comes near and using what it has taken to draw more near, family by family, voice by voice, spreading through the county the way a crack spreads through a windshield, following the lines of grief, because grief is exactly the thing that will make a person answer a 3 a.m. call from the dead and drive 9 miles out into the dark to see a face they've lost. And here is the piece that mattered most, the piece that told me what to do. The phone did not need to be believed. It did not need to be answered a certain way. It did not need me to pick up or refuse to pick up, to attend to it or turn away from it. None of that touched it, because none of that touched the ground, and the pull was in the ground. I could have refused every call for the rest of my life, and the thin place would have gone right on pulling the next person out to it, and the next, 20 minutes at a time, because it did not run on being answered. It ran on being there. It was a hole. A hole does not care whether you believe in it. It only cares that you come near the edge, and it had a slope that made sure you would. So I stopped trying to talk to it. I stopped picking up. But not because refusing the call was the cure. It was not. Refusing changed nothing about the ground. I stopped because I finally understood that the thing had to be met. The only way a physical wound in the earth with a machine standing over it can be met, which is physically, with tools, by a man who knows how to close a hole in the ground, and I am, as it happens, exactly that man. I planned it the way I would plan a hard repair, methodically with a list, because the list is what keeps your hand steady when the rest of you wants to run. I would go out before dawn on a Sunday, when the county road is as empty as it ever gets. I would not go to the phone to use it. I would go to unmake it as a fixture, and then to close the thin place under it, and I understood that both halves mattered. That pulling out the phone without closing the ground would leave the wound open with no marker, and closing the ground without removing the phone would leave a handle standing over a scar. And I wanted neither. I wanted no fixture and no hole. I wanted an ordinary, forgettable stretch of empty lot on a forgotten road that no one would ever again feel the slightest reason to slow down for. I rented the heaviest gear I could get on short notice. I brought a generator and a cutting torch and a welding rig and chain, 40 feet of it, heavy tow chain and a hydraulic breaker, and my own hand tools. And I brought in the back of the van bag after bag of fast-setting concrete mix and jugs of water, because I had done the arithmetic on what it takes to fill a soft void in the ground, and I had decided I would rather bring too much than too little, and drive back for more if I had to. I did the phone first. I did not pick up the receiver. I took the torch to the armored cord where it met the body of the unit, and I cut the handle away without ever lifting it, and it fell and hung by nothing, and I let it lie, and I felt, when the cord parted, a change in the air of the booth, a slackening, though that may have been my own nerves. Then I cut the phone unit itself off its mount, the whole scarred steel body of it, and I carried it out to the van at arm's length like a thing that might still bite, and I laid it in the back on a tarp. Then I took the booth apart, the aluminum frame and the glass panels, panel by panel, unbolting where I could and cutting where I could not, and I loaded all of it, because I did not want one aluminum upright, one pane of glass, left standing at that spot for a driver's eye to catch, for a lost person to step into. And the whole time the cold mineral smell came up stronger from the seam in the concrete. the deep earth breath of the place, as though whatever was below had noticed the light coming in and was breathing harder, and I worked through it, because a man with a list works through things. That is what the list is for. Then I dug down to where the cable went into the ground, and I broke out the old concrete around it with the breaker, and I followed the seam down, and I found what I had known in my gut I would find, which was that the ground there was wrong. It was soft where it should have been packed, and cold, deeply cold, cold coming up out of it in a slow exhale, and when I had opened it enough, the smell rolled up thick, that vast cold underground air, and I did not put my head down over the opening to look, because I am not a fool, and because I could hear, faintly, rising out of it, the same distant murmur I had heard in the receiver, the sound of the great many gathered below. And one of the voices in it, I will tell you honestly, had a catch in it that I knew, and I did not look, and I did not call down, and I did not answer, and I reached instead for the first bag of concrete. I filled it. That is the whole of the act, and it has a name and a procedure. It is the thing the county itself does to old wells and abandoned mine shafts and sinkholes that open in a field. You fill the void with grout until it will take no more. You plug the wound with stone. I mixed, and I poured, and I mixed, and I poured, down into that cold, soft opening, and it drank the first bags fast, greedily, the way soft ground does, and then slower and slower. And I kept at it as the sky went from black to gray to the first thin blue of dawn. An ordinary man in work clothes on an empty road pouring concrete into a hole, which is a thing so ordinary that no one who drove past, and 2 cars did, would have looked at me twice. And at last it would take no more. The void was full. The cold breath of it was sealed under a rising plug of stone, and the smell was gone, and the murmur was gone, and there was only the smell of wet concrete, and my own sweat, and the diesel of the generator, and I sat on the tailgate of my van, and I watched it set, in the growing light, until it was hard, because I would not leave until it was hard. The receiver and the phone unit I drove 200 miles to a scrap smelter, where I know a man, and I watched both of them go into the furnace, the steel of them going first orange, and then white, and then gone, becoming nothing that could ever again be a handle for anyone to lean on, and I do not know for certain that this step was necessary, but I know that I did not want a handle to the thin place existing anywhere in the world, and now there is not one. And the aluminum and glass of the booth I took 100 miles in the other direction to a metals recycler, and I did not leave it in one bin. I spread it across 4 different bins on 4 different days, the uprights here, the panels there, so that there could never again, by any chance or intention, be a booth reassembled to stand at that spot, and no thin place left open beneath it for anyone to stand over. Dely did not call again. That is the thing I hold on to because in the end it is nearly the only thing I have. The calls stopped. I have checked, quietly, carefully with the families, and there have been no more 3 a.m. calls from the booth's number because there is no booth, and no phone, and no number, and I have to believe no thin place, because I filled it with stone, and I watched the stone set hard in the dawn. There have been no new people seen standing on the county road at strange hours 9 miles from anywhere. No new cars left in driveways with the keys in the dish. The count in this county stopped at 14. There is no 15th. Whatever slow, patient, hungry feature of the ground had learned to reach up through a forgotten phone and spread itself household by household through this county. Following the grief from door to door, it is under a plug of concrete now, with no fixture to mark it, and no handle to lean on, and no way for a single voice to reach the surface to say, "Come out to the booth." And it will do, I have to believe, what a capped well does, which is nothing, forever quietly, while the road goes on above it. My sister is still gone. I have had to make my peace with that, or to begin the long work of making my peace with it, because I have learned the hardest lesson this whole thing had to teach, which is that closing the wound did not empty it. A sealed sinkhole does not give back what it swallowed. Dely is where the other 13 are, in the large, cold space beneath the county road, and I could reach that space only long enough to close it, not long enough to bring anyone up out of it. and by the time I understood what the phone truly was, she had already slid all the way down, 4 days gone, and there was no bringing her back. There never had been. Not from the first night she came to herself out on the county road with no memory of turning that way. I did not save my sister. I want to be honest about that, more honest than the stories usually are, because the stories always seem to let the one who fights the thing save the person he loves, and I did not. I was too late for Dely, and I will go on being too late for her every day for the rest of my life, and I have stopped pretending otherwise. But there is no 15th. That is what I did. Not a rescue, not a haunting, laid to rest with love and courage. A repair. There was a wound in the ground with a machine standing over it, drawing people down into the dark one by one, and it could not be prayed away or answered away or refused away, because it did not run on any of that. It ran on simply being there with a slope that pulled. And so I unmade the machine, and I filled the wound with stone, with a welding rig and 40 feet of chain, and a hydraulic breaker, and 40 bags of fast-setting mix, and a supply list, because I fix machines, and that is the only thing that was ever going to work, and it worked. My sister is still down there in the dark with the others, and I sealed them in when I sealed it shut, and I have to carry that too, and I do. But no one else in this county will ever again drive out 9 miles on a forgotten road and feel, without knowing why, that they ought to slow down at the empty lot where a filling station used to be. There is nothing there now to slow down for. And that absence, that ordinary nothing where a terrible something used to stand, is the whole of what I accomplished, and it is not enough, and it is everything, and it will have to be what I live on, because it is what there is.